Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the storytelling track. This is the final session in this 10-session track. I hope that some of you have been following it, and if not, and you're just tuning into this one, that's great too. We started off with talking to a linguist about the very words and the language and the framing of our thoughts. And we have just ended with one of the leading media theorists of our time, talking about what the digital ecosystem is doing to how we interact as humans. So we really went from square one to all the way into the future. And in between, we heard from leading journalists and editors. We heard from a virtual reality producer. We heard from the leading scientific editor alive today. It's really been an incredible journey. And if you weren't able to watch some of the sessions, I hope that you're able to go back and listen to some of them. And for those of you who did watch, I hope that you learned something, whether it's about how to report a story in the field or how to make sense of what it means that we're on our computers all the time now. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can reach me in the chat group or for the storytelling track or in private messages. But I wanted to end on this quote that Bill McKibben said in his session yesterday with John Vidal and 2 days ago. And it is that storytelling is how we make sense of everything. And I think that was the fundamental reason for why this track was created, and it should underpin our thinking going forward in the world. Stories are in our minds, they're in our hearts, they're all around us, they fill our every single day. And if we're conscious and if we shape them correctly, and if we're hyper aware of how we create our stories, then we can be their creators and we can have control. And as we try to create a more sustainable future, they start with stories. So I hope you took something away from this track, and we're going to close now with a really beautiful and powerful speech from Bayo Akomolafe. He's a Nigerian poet, artist, writer, thinker. He's currently based in India. He runs a beautiful group of artists and thinkers and creatives called the Emergence Network, and he's put together a really incredible speech about where the future narrative and the future story should go. I encourage you to keep an open mind with the speech. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, but it's a really powerful message about what we can do with the state of things now and where we can take that to lead us into a more positive direction. So enjoy, and in order to watch, you can click the Watch Now button in the top right corner of your screen. And yes, enjoy, and thank you so much for joining the storytelling track of GLF Bonn.
Hello, my name is Bayo Akomolafe, and I thank you all. I greet you all, my brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, wherever you are in the world, whatever your circumstances are in these times of crisis. I commend this gathering around stories and climate futures. I am in India, where I make my living, and I live with my family. We're in Chennai, India, and I didn't need the news to confirm this, is said to be the hottest region in the world at this moment. So I speak to you out of a sense of climatic urgency, if you will. I'm living and breathing the things that I would say to you. I'm here to tell a story, as I've been invited to, a story about hope, a story about agency, a story about futures. Or to be more specific, I'm here to tell the story of the generativity of losing hope, the irony of agency and control, and the impossibility of moving forward. Why such a controversial stance, you might ask? I'm not ready for this. If you would stick with me for a few minutes, I would lay the grounds and pour the libations, the libratory waters upon this ground that might hopefully offer us different ways of sensing what is happening around us and come into touch the liveliness of the happenings and events that we rudely call crisis. I come from a part of the world called Nigeria. I'm part of the Yoruba people. And among the Yoruba people, as is the case among many African cultures, there is a tradition which involves a pouring of water or some kind of liquid, beer, wine to the earth, to the ground, and offering blessings, pronouncements of favors or prayers for the people in the act of pouring such liquid to the ground. We call these rites, these rituals, libations. I grew up watching my father or his friends or elders do it, or watching people on TV do it when we didn't have the chance to do it. And I always wondered as a kid, why waste a perfectly good glass of wine, pouring it to the ground? Why do that? I would hear my father say, it's for the gods. He was a Christian, but he would say it's for the gods, and he would pour just a little part of his drink to the earth. And I wondered why. Why do this? It wasn't until I grew older that I learned the mytho-poetic reasons behind this ritual. And I want to share that story with you. It comes from Egypt, actually Old Kemet, which is the previous name for Egypt. The story is told about a god, Ra, who was this drunken old bearded fellow who sat on the street singing useless songs to no one in particular, and debased himself so much that men, women, and children would mock him and make fun of him. One day, in his drunken stupor and in his anger, he threw a fit and returned to the heavens. And in his tantrum, he called upon the destruction of all of mankind. And who would he send to do this ignoble and awful task? It was his daughter, who also happened to be his wife, who also happened to be his mother. The name Hathor might ring a bell. Hathor came and she swore that she would leave no stone unturned until she returned to earth and destroyed all men, all women, all children, all of mankind. And so she did this. She came to the planet and she ate human bodies in a cannibalistic rampage. She would eat and leave puddles of blood in her wake. And nothing the men could throw at Hathor would deter her. They would throw stones and arrows and all the technologies they could muster would do nothing to deter Hathor. They noticed that every night she would lick up all the puddles of blood and she would retire. And in the morning she would come and continue her rampage, seeking out human bodies wherever they hid and eating them. When human beings could take it no longer, they cried out to Ra and said, please avert this crisis. Stop this destruction. Save us. And Ra took pity upon men and said, I'm going to stop this. And so he called Hathor to order. Except Hathor would not heed the call of Ra. She could not be stopped by God or man. And Ra found out that there was a problem. It took Ra coming down to earth and having a discussion with a league, a guild of humans to think about, what do we do about this crisis? There's no one who could stop Hathor. There's no one who could save us. And then a trick emerged from their consort. A suggestion. What if we ceased being human? Since your original instructions to Hathor was to destroy all of mankind, all human beings, what if we ceased being human? How? Came the response. What if we tricked Hathor into drinking something different? And then the suggestion took conspiratorial shape and form in this wise, that in the morning, just before Hathor came and started her rampage all over again, They would plant puddles of wine, red wine, that looked exactly like blood. And they would retreat into their hiding places and caves and watch Hathor. Their hope was that Hathor would lap up the wine, thinking it was blood, get drunk, and forget her task for the day. And that is exactly what happened. They planted wine on the ground, poured wine in this original act of the libation, and they retreated. And Hathor came, bemused, confused. I thought I drank this up in the night. What is this still doing here? And she would drink the blood, which was actually wine, forget what was her protocol and program for the day, and fall asleep. And that act of pouring wine to the ground became this spiritual act of remembrance, this way to remind ourselves that the world is made up of a trick, that we're sustained not by the wisdoms that we might claim to ourselves or by our technologies, but by the trickery, the trickster's energy, the myth, and the invitation to fall down to the earth, the act of descent. Now, there is a central and resilient tale in our climate narratives, a general tale of the Anthropocene. And one of that is, I can speak about four at least, is that as we face this crisis, we are separate from the environment. These are the largely invisible narratives that we have about the climate crisis. We tell ourselves, even though we don't tell ourselves through our rhetoric, but through deeds and our actions and our efforts to save ourselves and the planet, we reinforce the idea that we're separate from the environment. One other narrative is that if we could get our act together, educate more of us, just put out the data, we could solve our problems, fix the planet. We can defeat this monster. We can beat this Hathorian beast. We can defeat climate change. That's another myth I can share. That we will prevail. It's the poetry of the hero, the one who will survive. We tell ourselves in that Churchillian phrase, we must never ever give up. We must keep at it. It's the story of grit that innervates our anthropocentric activities. And also, we tell ourselves that this is a human project. It involves all humans. It's a universal planetary ethic that involves all people everywhere. And in the face of this Hathorian crisis, we are one. At least these are some sticky ideas that attend our storytelling, the ways we tell the story about what is happening in the world today. I have counter ideas that come from my people, that come from my experiences, and not just my experiences, the experiences of a collective, the experiences of those that have been invisibilized, dispossessed, excluded, excavated for most of modern history. First, the idea that we're separate from the environment is being torn down, is hollowing out. We're learning in more ways than one that we're entangled with the world that we claim mastery over. That to be human is an ecological project, is a cartographical project. Just the very act of traversing the Atlantic in a quest for new worlds was a cartographical project, an ecology shaping project that led to the demise of trees, that led to ecocide, that led to the dispossession of peoples. We've never been separate from the world. We've never been separate from the environment. And to read ourselves away from the environment, to read ourselves as superior, transcendent over the world that we claim we want to inhabit or fix, is to perpetuate the silent myth of anthropocentricity. The second one is that if we could only get our act together, educate ourselves more, we could solve our problems. It's all a matter of political will. But we've been at this for decades, ever since the narrative of ecological and environmental damage became mainstream. Since the 70s, since April 22nd, and even prior to that in 1970, when the first Earth Day was celebrated. We've been working at this. We've been championing the clarion call of urgency for decades. And in spite of all the information out there, in spite of the data, even among those who believe adamantly the data that is coming from the sciences, the climate sciences, nothing seems to be shifting radically enough to address the issues that we want to address. It almost seems as if there are tense matters or matters in tension with the things that we explicitly believe. It almost seems we're not in control, that behavior is much more than what we say we believe in. And then thirdly, the idea that we will prevail. We must never ever give up. I come from a people who do not have the luxury of thinking too far into the future. The question of what do I eat now is more prevalent. What do I have now on my table? What will sustain me till tomorrow, till next week? Ideas about decades into the future are not luxuries we can enjoy at the moment. And yet there is a sort of abundance that comes not with a certain hope or hopefulness, but in losing hope. There is a sort of generativity, a giftedness, a connectivity that comes when we realize that we're not in control, that in grieving there is power. It is the experiences of Africans and now the creolized African bodies in the Americas that under colonial powers and in the face of rigid iron imperial might, they had to learn other ways of situating power. They had to learn to explore the cracks of power. They had to learn to descend into the ground, just like a libation, and do things that only hopelessness can do. And then finally, the idea that this involves all humans across the planet presumes the universality of the concept of the human. If there's one thing the Anthropocene does not know how to do, it does not know how to account for the losses of the project of modernity. It does not know how to look into the past and think of it as still lingering. It wants to look into the future, to fix the problems in the future, to chart algorithms that would help us reach 2050 and beyond. But it does not know how to account for transatlantic meanderings. It does not know how to account for dispossession. It does not know how to account for the bones and memories that have been buried under the asphalt and the highways of progress. In other words, there are spirits, there are animals, there are lively beings, they are more than humans. It's not just us that occupies the world. We are not central to how things change or emerge. We are not central to how things evolve. We are not central to the imperatives of the planet. So, in a sense, today, brothers and sisters, we are learning about a surprisingly alive planet, a surprisingly vital world, so shockingly alive that our modern culture doesn't know what to do with it. Whether it's in terms of viruses or heat or gases, we are learning that the world will not be put in the family way. And all of these things that I've just spoken about suggest an insurgency of the invisible, things that we have put aside for so long, things that have dwelt in the garbage grounds of our blind spots, are now coming to the focal point of our visions. And it's disturbing because it's wiping away the hieroglyphics of agency. We are learning that we are attached to institutions, to ways and habitual means of perceiving the world. And our good intentions will not save the day. What would it feel like to notice that we are part of assemblages instead of individual liberal human subjects thinking together to try to solve their problems? What would it be like to turn to the past and treat it as serious? Not in a bid to resolve it, but to stay with the trouble, the lingering, haunting trouble of things that will not be easily resolved, or things that will not be easily articulated, or things that will not be easily rendered intelligible. What if the way we respond to the crisis is the crisis? And our very efforts to replicate, to innovate, to provide solutions only deepens our crisis. And the crisis is, in many senses, the idea that we are in control. We're central to the paradigm of becoming. We're central to the way the world, the earth, changes. It's one thing to notice the problematic and deeply troublesome nature of human activity. And it's one thing to perpetuate our centrality, this problematic presence, by trying to solve that problematic presence. The invitation maybe at this time is to unlearn mastery. Climate justice must be decolonial justice. Climate change cannot be addressed as an externality, a thing that we can put on our budgets, a thing that we can throw money at, a thing that we can throw a new technology at. If it does not involve us meeting ourselves as if for the first time, if it does not involve us doing what those mythical collectives did when faced with a God who will not or who would not be held back, to address what it meant to be human, to address what it meant to be alive. This is why I think a libation is needed, a collective libation, if you will, a way to learn how to die well. Maybe the very effort to address our crisis is a crisis itself. Maybe we need some kind of a post-activism, not a dismissal of contemporary activism, not a successor epistemology, not a successor narrative, not a superior way of thinking about solutions, but a way of slowing down, a way of asking questions that we don't know how to ask now, a way of staying with the trouble of our acentrality, a way of meeting other beings, a way of dwelling in crossroads, a way of composting our edges and allowing ourselves to shapeshift and become different. Maybe only then visions of what might happen, imaginations of the next, will not be a repetition, a reiteration, or reinforcement of the familiar. This is why we need a libation. And this is where I will end my story. I thank you for listening.